ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أرأيتم ما أنزل الله لكم من رزق فجعلتم منه حراما وحلال قل الله أذن لكم أم على الله تفترون صدق الله العلي العظيم وصدق رسوله النبي الكريم ونحن على ذلك من الشاهدين. I bear witness that without Allah there is no God. I bear witness that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, is the last, the final messenger of Allah, after whom no prophet old or new will come. And I begin in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. There has often been much confusion about the use of two words in the Quran. The words halal and the words haram. We take it for granted that these words are used in the context in which they are applied, and whatever interpretation is given is just being accepted. But specifically with regards to these two terminologies, the Quran gives certain guidelines and instructions. For example, in the verse that I've recited in Arabic, I translate as follows: speak out, tell people, speak out. Have you noticed what Allah has disclosed to you all about food? After which you make it haram and halal. Speak out. Has Allah given you this privilege? Or are you telling lies on Allah? Another verse of the Quran tells us quite clearly, do not broadcast what lie your mouths describe. This is halal and this is haram. وَلَا تَقُولُوا لِمَنْ تَصِفُوا أَلْسِنَتَكُمُ الْكَذْبَ هَذَا halal wa hadha haram. Do not broadcast. Do not speak out and say a lie that has been invented by your mouths to describe and to say that this is halal and this is haram, thus telling a lie on Allah. Certainly those who invent the lie on Allah cannot succeed. The meaning of halal and the meaning of the word halal literally is to untie a knot, to loosen something. And it applies to certain restrictions that you may have. If something is tied, it means it's restricted. And therefore to untie a knot means to loosen the restrictions that are there, and it has been applied to mean, therefore, to make something lawful. In other words, this is without restrictions. This is permitted. This is allowed. This is lawful. So halal, therefore, is a state of lawfulness. It is a condition or a situation that is free of restrictions. There are no restrictions. It is allowed. It is permitted. It is halal. The word halal does not mean to slaughter or to kill an animal or whatever it is. Nor is it only applied to meat. When the Quran uses the word halal with regards to food, it applies to all foods. Bananas are halal without slaughtering. You don't slaughter it. Rice, roti, all of these things are halal. And even before an animal is slaughtered, it is halal. The animal itself is halal. You cannot halal an animal because the animal is already, except certain things which are mentioned in the Quran. For example, if it dies of itself, it is not halal. You can't slaughter that. You can't kill it if it is already dead. So whether or not you slaughter an animal, the cow, the goat, the chickens, all of these are halal. But the flesh of swine, pork, is not. These things are clearly stated in the Quran. Sometimes, however, the reverse is true. Pork is normally haram at all times, except when we are driven to hunger, then it becomes halal. For example, if there's a tsunami, a hurricane, a flood, and people have nothing else to eat for survival, and the Quran lays down the conditions under which that which is forbidden has now become halal. If an animal is found dead and a person has to survive, the Quran lays down the rules for that. So halal foods are also haram. For example, when you are in pilgrimage, in a state of ihram, hunting of an animal is haram. The Quran tells us this. And halal foods, of course, are haram for us during the period of fasting. When you are fasting, the food that is halal for you is haram for you. You cannot eat it, it's forbidden. And if you look at the meaning of the word haram, haram is that which has been tied, which has been stopped or forbidden or restricted. Just the opposite of halal. It also means that which is taboo, that which is sacred, because something that is sacred has restrictions. You put sanctions, you put restrictions on something. The word sanction in English means to make holy, as well as to, you sanction a country or trade or so, means you restrict them, you prevent them, you put certain prohibitions. So while halal is a state of lawfulness, haram is a state of unlawfulness. It is a condition or a situation which is filled with restrictions. Now, the Quran uses the word haram with regards to other than animals. We know of the Masjidul Haram, the Kaaba is called that. It doesn't mean the non-slaughtered mosque. If halal means slaughtered and haram means that which is not slaughtered by a Muslim, then how do you translate the Masjidul Haram? The Quran speaks of certain months as haram. It speaks of certain women as haram. For example, in marriage. For example, a person cannot marry their mother or two sisters at a time and such things. And then it identifies what meats, when it comes to meat now, it identifies, or animals, it identifies what are haram. What are the meats that are haram? And there are 9 that have been identified by the Quran. It says that which dies of itself, an animal is found dead, you cannot eat it. The blood of the animal is haram. Pork is haram. That on which any other name of Allah has been mentioned, and it's important, this 4th one, to note what the Quran says. A name other than Allah. So if you mention a name other than Allah on the animal, that is haram. The strangled animal, or one beaten by death, or one killed by a fall, or killed by goring with a horn, and what beasts have eaten. So these are the 9 conditions or states of animals that the Quran has identified as being haram. But when you come to people who are not Muslims, as some people think that halal is what is slaughtered by a Muslim and haram is what is slaughtered by non-Muslims. There's no distinction like that in the Quran. Meat prepared by people of other faith systems is halal. The Quran says so. Meat prepared, or that matter, not only meat, any food prepared by people of other faith system is halal, as long as they do not fall under these 9 categories. So whether Muslim or non-Muslim, pork is forbidden under normal circumstances. So, there's a verse of the Quran, however, that is often quoted by some people that says, do not eat from that which Allah's name has not been mentioned. So they say that if Allah's name is not mentioned, that is haram. But this is not what the verse means. This verse says, do not eat from that which Allah's name has not been mentioned, and it has not. There's no mention here of animal or slaughtering. It applies to all foods. This has to deal with eating, not slaughtering. This verse of the Quran that says, do not eat from that which Allah's name has not been mentioned, means do not eat, not do not slaughter. In other words, it applies, it has nothing to do with eating, it has to do with eating, not slaughtering, and it applies to non-food, meat food as well. So even rice, or pizza, whatever it is you are eating, don't eat unless Allah's name is mentioned. So the rule is to eat from that on which Allah's name is mentioned. In other words, the Quran tells us also, what reason have you not to eat of that on which Allah's name is mentioned? He has already made plain to you what is haram to you. So when you are not, then the food is not haram, there's no restriction, there's no reason for you not to eat from it. But there's a condition that before you eat, you must say Bismillah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Whenever you eat, you begin with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So much so that in some Muslim countries, when they invite you to a meal, you say, come on, let's Bismillah. Not just eat, let's Bismillah. In other words, let's say Bismillah and then eat our food. And it's good to teach our children, and not only Muslims, non-Muslims, that before you eat to mention the name of Allah, in the name of Allah, because food is a provision that is given to us by our Creator. Now the Quran tells us that if any other name besides Allah is mentioned, whether by a Muslim or non-Muslim, that meat is definitely forbidden, haram. Any meat which is slaughtered in the name of some god,